Be advised, this is armor is busy.
I'm here about the machine and the old growth.
You're going after that horror.
I'm going to try. Do you mind answering a couple of questions about it?
I'll tell you what I can.
Tell me what happened, step by step.
There were 5 of us, hunting for boar to help feed the tribe, just like we had done half a dozen times before. Some machines got in our way. Happens every time we go to the old growth. Like always, cleared them out. But this time, when we were done, we heard this roar.
Hey, easy.
I saw it flash from the trees, all claws and tail. It ripped right by Cole, and we and Zan came right at me. Slashed my shoulder. There was blood. Then an arrow slammed into his neck. My friend loud. He distracted. Yelled and whooped. It turned on him. He disappeared into the trees. And it followed him. Last thing I heard him yell was for me to run. So I did. I was halfway back to playing song before I realized what I had done. Left loud to die.
Is there anything you can tell me about the machine that might help?
It looked like a claw strider, but it was stronger. Much stronger.
Anything else?
Its armor was darker and it had a strange purple glow.
Thanks. I think I know what I'm dealing with. I need to get going.
You don't want to fight that thing.
Trust me. I know what I'm doing.
Well, if you do, I hope you cut it to shreds. It killed Lau, my oldest friend.
Don't worry about running out. This must be the old growth. Shells said the hunting party was attacked here. Best place to start looking for the hunter's seed pouches. There's a dead tower in the clearing. Must be one of the hunters. Gotta take out these machines before I can grab the seed pouch.
accept it and not question her at all during this process. Sobek realised that there was really nothing they could do to stop these swarms from wiping out the planet. With that in mind, she had to change the way she thought. Instead of shutting them down to save humanity, she would have to come up with a plan for shutting them down after the extinction event, and then rebuilding the planet, restoring all life once again. This would lead her to create an automated terraforming system that would be able to crack the swarm's code sets in just 50 years. Without human input, it would easily be able to use brute force to shut down the systems and finally destroy the swarms in the process without a real worry about time and if the chariots would get to it first. Once the swarms were shut down once and for all, it would then help restore the planet's atmosphere and ecosystem, and then eventually bring back humanity to let them thrive once again. This plan would be labelled by Sobek as Project Zero Dawn, but despite having everything planned out, there was another problem. Project Zero Dawn would have extreme moral consequences that most people would have objected to. The first being that they would need time to set up this supercomputer, and thus would need a distraction to help them work on it. With this in mind, the governments would have to sacrifice its people, sending them to war against a force they could not win against, just to allow the scientists to run their secret operation. On top of that, because this was not public, getting the right scientist would be a much harder task. They needed to be the best of the best, so the people that were put on the list would be abducted from their countries and told about Project Zero Dawn. They could choose to accept, or if they refused, they would get a choice of being detained for life with no outside contact or medically euthanized. Farrow was horrified of the moral implications of this project and really questioned himself when being asked to sign it off. However, he had no choice. If he did not sign it off, Sobek would tell the US Joint Chiefs of Staff that Farrow was the one responsible for all of this and immediately make it public. As Sobek met with the US government sectors, she briefed them on the highly unethical plan she had created and got them to sign after they paused for a good while, seeing how terrifying it really was. Sobek also went on to explain that it had to be humanity who was sent into war. Any robotics sent would be immediately converted by the chariot swarms and would then add to their numbers, meaning the planet's lifespan would drop dramatically each time. With extinction being on the table as a fact, General Aaron Jerez overrode the objections and set up Sobek with a staging area for the project under the Bryce Canyon in Utah, as well as the abductions of the necessary scientists who could help with this project. Humanity would now be sent to war, unknowingly sacrificing themselves to make sure that after their extinction, the planet could be restored once again, free from the chariot swarms and the Farrow Plague, which was making them hostile. This would become known as Operation Enduring Victory, a project solely funded by Farrow's personal wealth. This era would become the darkest time on planet Earth.
It happened an age ago. The shattering ensued, a war that brought only darkness.
As plans for Project Zero Dawn had been signed off, it was finally time for it to start up and begin, as they only had a limited amount of time left. Sobek presented to all of the scientists within the secret bunker what Project Zero Dawn actually was, and the 9 candidates who agreed to work on it became part of the Alphas, the leaders of the teams developing the 9 different functions of the AI system, which would be known as Gaia. The 2 most important of these systems would be known as Apollo and Hades. Apollo was a system put into place to allow the humans of the future to learn from their previous mistakes, teach them of the old ways, and to make sure this never happened again. Hades, however, was a fail-safe program which was to once again reset all life on the planet, in the event that Gaia's efforts didn't work and she had to start all over again. Sobek worked solely on Gaia and to great effect. It became the most complex and intelligent AI ever seen before in humanity's history, and was even capable of human empathy, being able to feel human emotions. Because of this, Sobek developed a great bond with the AI and constantly asked her for advice on the project, with Gaia insisting that she install a master override in case anything needed to be shut down. This was originally Farrow's idea, but that was shut down by Sobek as she didn't want to listen to him. However, Gaia convinced her that it was actually a good idea in the end. By this point in humanity's timeline, Operation Enduring Victory was just about a success. With the mass sacrifice of all of humanity, Sobek and the Alphas were able to get Zero Dawn fully operational just before the Pharaoh Plague consumed the planet. Sadly, the final military stronghold had fallen for humanity, and billions of lives had been wiped out by the swarms, lack of food and water, and an unlivable environment thanks to the swarm's consumption of all biomass. This news on how bad the world had become really hit Sobek hard, and she was overwhelmed by sadness. But thanks to Gaia's incredible empathy, she was able to convince Sobek that what she and the Alphas had done was necessary. She had to do what she did, or everything would have been lost. But saying all this, the full system wasn't complete as Gaia was taken to the new destination of Gaia Prime, due to humanity's final military area falling to the swarms. The Pharaoh Plague was on its way, and it was only a matter of time before they were gone too. This left the smaller teams being evacuated to Elysium, and Sobek and the Alphas being sealed within Gaia Prime to make sure their work was finalized. The day was now Zero Day, the predicted day that humanity as well as the planet's ecosystem would go extinct. However, Sobek and the Alphas continued on with Gaia Prime, with them and the other humans in Elysium being the last living organisms on the planet. Pharaoh during all of this survived as well, and on a regular basis contacted Sobek about updates. This was incredibly frustrating as it took away time from their work. However, Sobek humoured him to make sure that he didn't bother the other Alphas. As the project came to its close, one last thing hindered the team. Gaia suddenly had a port malfunction, meaning it failed to close within the 2mm maximum seam necessary to prevent a detectable energy signature leak. Gaia was to be detected. The Pharaoh Plague would be able to find it and destroy it, meaning all of this would have been for nothing. The Alphas argued about who would be the one to sacrifice themselves to go out into the hostile land and fix it. But during that, Sobek contacted them, stating the seal had been closed and the swarm were inbound. The Alphas tried to get her back in, but Sobek realized her fate was sealed. To find it and destroy it, meaning all of this would have been for nothing. The Alphas argued about who would be the one to sacrifice themselves to go out into the hostile land and fix it. But during that, Sobek contacted them, stating the seal had been closed and the swarm were inbound. The Alphas tried to get her back in, but Sobek realized her fate was sealed. Zero Dawn was more important, and she had to get it finished, even if it cost her her life. Stating the Alphas should look after one another, Sobek ended the transmission by stating she just wanted to go home. Sobek had now died, and thanks to her sacrifice, Gaia could do what it was set out to do, and one day would repopulate this land. The Alphas honoured Sobek's legacy by erecting a memorial to honour her and her work for preserving life. However, this was not the end. Pharaoh was losing his mind by this point, possibly due to the overwhelming guilt of what he had done. Because of this, the idea of Apollo teaching the future humans of what had happened was terrifying for him. He couldn't let the world know of what he had done. With this in mind, he labelled Apollo as a disease to the new world and sought to shut it down. Now without Sobek to control him and keep him in check, Pharaoh deleted Apollo and murdered the remaining Alphas to stop them from rebuilding Apollo. With this, all knowledge of what Sobek had done for humankind was gone, as her monument was sealed away, never to be seen again. Almost a century passed and the planet had been pretty much reset by Gaia. However, like all things, there was a new problem on the table. Gaia's subordinate functions were turned into self-aware and erratic AIs, all thanks to a mysterious signal received from an unknown location. This forced the sub-faction of Hades into attack mode and immediately tried to wipe out Gaia's terraforming system and wipe out humanity once again. Gaia Prime immediately took action trying to shut down Hades, but this would lead to Gaia's destruction in the process and the shutdown of its terraforming system. With all this going on, Gaia somehow activated an unused Zero Dawn protocol called Lightkeeper, which would go on to make clones of the original Alpha designers that would help rebuild Gaia's system core once they reach maturity. With this, Gaia ordered Eleuthia 9 within the Cradle facility where all the Alpha's genetic material was stored, and with it Elizabeth Sobek's clone was made. On the 4th of April 3021, Sobek's perfect clone was made consisting of all her traits, including her personality, and with it Elizabeth Gaia somehow activated an unused Zero Dawn protocol called Lightkeeper, which would go on to make clones of the original Alpha designers that would help rebuild Gaia's system core once they reach maturity. With this, Gaia ordered Eleuthia 9 within the Cradle facility where all the Alpha's genetic material was stored, and with it, Elizabeth Sobek's clone was made. On the 4th of April 1321, Sobek's perfect clone was made consistent of all her traits, including her personality of being curious, brave, and compassionate, and would be seen in her words as having enough compassion to heal the world. 19 years old and Hades is still active, looking to wipe out humanity and everything Gaia had made, resetting the world once again. However, finding Aloy, Sobek's clone, the AI system would realise it has encountered an old enemy, and to complete its task, it would have to wipe out Aloy at all costs, to make sure she doesn't repair Gaia and reset its terraforming system. On this venture, Aloy would uncover the stories of the past, witnessing the return of the Pharaoh Plague, and get to witness Sobek's sacrifice and what she had done for humanity. Thanks to this brave individual, humanity can thrive once again in this bright and beautiful world filled with terraformed creatures and a thriving ecosystem. In the end, Sobek's legacy now lives on, despite Pharaoh's been desperately to shut it down, and now the planets can continue to rebuild once again, thanks to Sobek projects.
Hades existed just to do that, to keep Gaia in check and undo her efforts should the terraforming process fail and need to be restarted. The most select and brilliant minds the world could offer were needed to lead these projects, and under these most capable of people would serve teams that would need to do anything and everything possible to make Gaia a reality. There was no time that could be wasted on gentleness when it came to candidates, as the world prepared to enact the public version of Operation Enduring Victory. Those selected to become part of the ultra-top-secret Project Zero Dawn were collected at private research and manufacturing facilities. The news was broken bluntly, under the supervision of on-site psychiatrists and security, one-on-one, so as not to inspire a mob should someone react poorly to the news. And once the news was broken and the invitation to Zero Dawn was extended, that individual had 3 options, and only 3 options. Option 1. Accept the invitation. Mandatory minimum of 80-hour work weeks. All communication with the outside world limited and actively monitored. Upon completion of Zero Dawn, the employee may bring their family or 2 select individuals to live out the rest of their natural lives in a hermetically sealed environment deep underground, a place called Elysium. All people brought into Elysium were required to be sterilized. Option 2. Reject and face imprisonment. The candidate could not be allowed to leave and reveal the truth to the world. Should someone choose not to cooperate and be imprisoned, they were given 48 hours to change their mind, after which their imprisonment could not be undone and was to last until Project Zero Dawn was complete, at which point they would be allowed to leave the facility and face their death in the outside world. Option 3. Medically assisted suicide. This option required at least a 48-hour wait and several meetings with medical personnel to ensure that this was the candidate's sound choice. If this path was chosen, a humane and peaceful death is delivered. This option is available to any Zero Dawn employee at any time, so long as the 48-hour waiting period and medical consultations are carried out. There were some who fought against this news, who screamed, who became violent, whose minds broke, who wept and bartered. But teams were assembled quickly, with no limitations placed upon what they could create to make Gaia a reality. Each division was headed by a person referred to as an alpha, who resided over personnel either deemed betas or gammas. In the end, they would all receive the same reward in Elysium. Gaia was not the only attempt at salvation for mankind. The Keeper of Cyan prepared the AI for a future without them. Remember, Cyan is the caldera of Yellowstone Analytic Nexus, the AI that kept the Yellowstone caldera in check. Cyan's creator was a woman named Anita Sandoval, and the project director was Kenny Zhao. Anita and Kenny had secretly been breaking some rules with Cyan, letting the AI become a little more sentient and emotionally attuned than was technically legal. It was necessary, one could argue, for Cyan to understand the importance of life so that she would do all in her power to maintain the caldera. And as a result, Cyan was indeed very emotionally intelligent for an AI. And when the fair play came, Kenny returned to Cyan saving the world, providing unlimited geothermal energy through the Yellowstone caldera to North America, financing life-extending studies, technologies, all that's great. There was a market for those calling temporaries in saving to his bank account. The military and automated warfare. Pharaoh in an underground facility that was built near the caldera, equipped with machinery, robotics, and an AI that could maintain calmness within the volcano. Employees that still maintain Yellowstone despite its movement towards the path had worked to shut it down. origin of all life on Earth. On November 3rd, 2064, Elizabeth Sobek traveled to the U.S. Robot Command to meet with the military leaders and inform them of the situation, a meeting that shocked Ted Farrow. One has to wonder what he would have done to handle the situation if Elizabeth hadn't arrived. Possibly refused to publicly address it. Blame it on somebody else. Vanish? Well, Elizabeth refused to sit in denial or in fear, and on that very day, the Joint Chiefs initiated Operation Enduring Victory. There was the public perception of what Operation Enduring Victory was, and then there was the truth. The public was made aware of what was now coined the Pharaoh Plague in November of 2064, and everyone in the world, save a handful of individuals, believed that Enduring Victory was a call to arms for all of the world to fight against the approaching swarms, to buy time for the brave men and women working relentlessly to deactivate or take control of the swarm. But then there was the truth. Humanity needed to fight, yes, to slow the swarm as much as possible. Not to buy time for salvation, though. There would be no salvation. All would be consumed. No one was going to survive this. It would take 50 years to crack the Pharaoh Plague. At best, the world had 16 months. And if the swarm didn't kill every living creature on Earth, then oxygen deprivation would. In fact, environmental breakdown was an equal threat to the violence of the swarm. There was no escaping the finality of mankind. Time would be paid for in blood, and it was an unfair choice that no one had the right to make, but it had to be made. Operation Enduring Victory would buy time for the greatest minds in the world to enact Project Zero Dawn. At the heart of Zero Dawn was the most sophisticated artificial intelligence ever conceived, mothered by Elizabeth Sobek. It was called Gaia. Gaia would act as the governing center over several subordinate functions. More on them in a bit, but Gaia's goal was eventually restoring life to Earth. Now, this wouldn't be possible with the swarm active, but Gaia would carry on beyond life on Earth. She was tasked with making the trillions of decisions that would be required to create the deactivation codes to stop the swarm, build the infrastructure to transmit those codes, then terraform the Earth and restore the potential for life to exist there once again, down to the tiniest of bacteria. Gaia would need to function independently for centuries, detoxifying the Earth's atmosphere, cleaning the poisoned seas, re-greening the Earth through seed stocks, and then bringing wildlife back from extinction. Eventually, via cradle facilities, when the world was readied, human life would begin anew, with mother and father systems to raise a new generation and ready them for this strange new world. The subordinate systems needed to accomplish this were as Gaia's limbs. Minerva would crack the Pharaoh Plague to stop the swarm. Hephaestus would create the machinery necessary for other subordinate systems to function. And then systems like Poseidon, who would cleanse the waters, and Aether, who would detoxify the atmosphere. Then Demeter would restore plant life all around the world. Artemis would eventually see to the wildlife. Eleuthia would bring humanity back to Earth and raise a new generation within the cradle after Gaia deemed the world ready for them to return. Apollo would take care of the knowledge needed for this new generation to learn and grow, the keeper of humanity's past. And finally, a system called Hades. Hades was required to act as a counter to Gaia. Gaia would do anything to bring life back to Earth, but it was possible that there would be attempts that just resulted in failure. The slate would need to be wiped clean to try again. Hades existed just to do that, to keep Gaia in check and undo her efforts should the terraforming process fail and need to be restarted. The most select and brilliant minds the world could offer were needed to lead these projects, and under these most capable of people would serve teams that would need to do anything and everything possible to make Gaia a reality. There was no time that could be wasted on gentleness when it came to candidates. As the world prepared to enact the public version of Operation Enduring Victory, those selected to become part of the ultra-top secret Project Zero Dawn were collected at private research and manufacturing facilities. The news was broken bluntly, under the supervision of on-site psychiatrists and security, one-on-one, so as not to inspire a mob should someone react poorly to the news. And once the news was broken and the invitation to Zero Dawn was extended, that individual had 3 options and minimum of 80-hour work weeks, all communication with the outside world limited and actively monitored. Upon completion of Zero Dawn, the employee may bring their family or two selected individuals to live out the rest of their natural lives in a hermetically sealed environment deep underground, a place called Elysium. All people brought into Elysium were required to be sterilized. Option 2. Reject and face imprisonment. The candidate could not be allowed to leave and reveal the truth to the world. Should someone choose not to cooperate and be imprisoned, they were given 48 hours to change their mind, after which their imprisonment could not be undone and was to last until Project Zero Dawn was complete, at which point they would be allowed to leave the facility and face their death in the outside world. Option 3. Medically assisted suicide. This option required at least a 48-hour wait and several meetings with medical personnel to ensure that this was the candidate's sound choice. If this path was chosen, a humane and peaceful death is delivered. This option is available to any Zero Dawn employee at any time, so long as the 48-hour waiting period and medical consultations are carried out. There were some who fought against this news, who screamed, who became violent, whose minds broke, who wept and bartered. But teams were assembled quickly, with no limitations placed upon what they could create to make Gaia a reality. Each division was headed by a person referred to as an alpha, who presided over personnel either deemed betas or gammas. In the end, they would all receive the same reward in Elysium. Gaia was not the only attempt at salvation for mankind. The Keeper of Cyan prepared the AI for a future without them. Remember, Cyan is the caldera of Yellowstone Analytic Nexus, the AI that kept the Yellowstone caldera in check. Cyan's creator was a woman named Anita Sandoval, and the project director was Kenny Zhao. Anita and Kenny had secretly been breaking some rules with Cyan, letting the AI become a little more sentient and emotionally attuned than was technically legal. It was necessary, one could argue, for Cyan to understand the importance of life so that she would do all in her power to maintain the caldera. And as a result, Cyan was indeed very emotionally intelligent for an AI. And when the Feral Plague came, Kenny returned to Cyan one more time to tell Cyan what was happening, bid a heartbreaking goodbye, and to put Cyan to sleep so that one day she could awaken to help rebuild the world. But Cyan was frightened of going alone, afraid of what was going to happen. So Kenny stayed with Cyan until she fell asleep, and sealed the facility of Project Firebreak to lend aid to the future. Then there was an old decommissioned space station called Odyssey, which was built back in the 2040s that had been abandoned to just orbit Earth. It had been bought for restoration in the mid-2050s, but the Feral Plague really kicked that effort into overdrive. A beta version of an AI called Apollo was integrated into Odyssey. Apollo was being built to be a subordinate function of Gaia, the keeper of humanity's history and knowledge. This version of Apollo was turned into an AI and integrated into Odyssey. Upon completion, the ship was loaded up with 200,000 fertilized human eggs and a variety of seeds. A crew of 50 to 60 manned the Odyssey, their goal being to guide the Odyssey out into deep space and route to another planet that could possibly support life, to leave the rest to chance and fate. Odyssey's journey was short, though. There was an antimatter containment failure on the ship when it attempted to leave the solar system. The entire ship, all of its cargo, and the beta AI Apollo were lost. Humanity did raise hell against the swarm. There was no going quietly into the night. With every victory won, the swarm came back with bigger units, titan monstrosities. The world slowly began to fall, piece by piece. Borders stood prepared to intercept armies of robots. Civilians fought alongside military and police, if not to defeat a wave of the swarm, then to just slow them down before death came. And death always came. Outposts that prepared for their time to fight often had waves of medically assisted suicide, and there was no judgment against an individual for not wanting to be torn apart in combat. But hope was never abandoned. Humanity would not give up. There was always faith in Operation Enduring Victory coming in to save the day. The swarm had been programmed to not have a kill switch, no back door to shut them off. was still work to be done. So, what had to be done was the Gamma and Beta workers were evacuated from the Gaia Prime facility and moved to Elysium while it was still safe to do so. They and their families lived the rest of their natural lives in safety there. The families of the Alphas were also moved to Elysium, but not the Alphas themselves. Not Elizabeth Sobek. There was still work to be done on Gaia. In mid-January 2066, the Gaia Prime facility was sealed. All inside could never leave. It wasn't meant to accommodate staff for an extended length of time. Their days were numbered. But right from the start, there was a problem. During the lockdown process, one of the doors did not completely seal. It was a difference of 8 millimeters. In that 8 millimeter gap, enough energy would leak from the station that the swarm would be able to find Gaia. 8 millimeters. So, while some of the Alphas argued about how it was going to be sealed or who was going to go out and seal it, Elizabeth Sobek put on a suit to help her survive outside, and she to manually seal the last door into Gaia Prime. She wanted to do it as they wanted. She wanted to go out. The Alphas didn't need to finish working on Gaia. Elizabeth Sobek instead turned to the surface. Just out of reach of the swarm, she managed to make it back to where she had spent her childhood. She said, peacefully await the end. With Elizabeth gone, Ted Farrow, he really began to unravel. He kept in close contact with the personnel still working on Gaia Prime, and he was extremely disturbed by Apollo, the subordinate function of Gaia that maintained records of human history and knowledge. He viewed the passing of this knowledge as a poison against the now unblemished future of mankind. Why give them access to the knowledge that led to humanity's downfall? Why would they ever place this burden upon them? Why give them that potential? Better to leave no trace of their sins, to let the past die exactly where it belongs. The Alphas worked beyond completion on Gaia. Shortly after Elizabeth's death, she was ready to serve her functions. For as long as they had, they would continue to optimize her systems. Project Zero Dawn was a success. Ted Farrow's constant need for involvement and for information was tiresome to the Alphas, who did their best to appease the man, but with Elizabeth Sobek no longer around to handle Farrow, he just got worse and worse. In fact, he only kept it together for about 2 weeks after Elizabeth's death. Then, Ted Farrow summoned all of the Alphas in Gaia Prime to a meeting where he locked them in and initiated his Omega override, something that the Alphas didn't even realize existed. They were locked in. They had no way of leaving the room. And he explained to them that he could not allow Apollo to exist. Human history, knowledge of the past, could not be allowed to tarnish the future. Ted Farrow destroyed Apollo, wiping out millennia of culture. And then, Ted Farrow murdered the Alphas. D-Day's full arrival happened in February of 2066. All that was left was Elysium. Gaia slumbered as her subordinate function Minerva worked her decrypting and deactivation code against the swarm. Eventually, presumably several decades later, Minerva taken back that code. And once Minerva completed Hephaestus woke up, and the creation of its mighty cauldron facilities began. In those places, the infrastructure and machines needed to make Gaia's birth possible would be created. For decades, Hephaestus built, then Poseidon cleansed the oceans. Aether purified the atmosphere, and then Demeter woke up and began to introduce plant life back onto the surface. Decades turned into centuries, and Artemis began restoring wild life. eventually, food within the Olympia facility ran, and the young ones inside, they had to be ushered out into the world to fend for themselves. And though there had been resistance to the mother and father caretakers in their teenage years, they asked if there was food out there, if they could come back if they were cold. What would happen to her, their caretaker? They were frightened. The year was 2326. It was time for humanity to return to the surface, to face this new, wild earth. And can you believe it? Those young folk, they made it. They survived in the wilds, went on to have children, and on for generations it continued. Hundreds of years bred diversity across the lands. The nomadic Banuk tribe settled in the snowy north called Banur, becoming a hardy traditional influenced society that valued ability and skill over name and legacy. The Banuk guard their ways of life against outsiders, often viewing non-Banuk with suspicion. The Oseram people found.
So I grew up singing in church. Like I remember the first time hearing something that they think is like love to be music. I was riding the Dutch truck in Miami. I came on the radio. I remember falling in love with country music that moment. I love the singing. There's nothing better than sounding. The best day in the world gets better than singing. Probably the last day you're listening to it. I will listen to something super sad. Don't know why.
If you enjoy this content, please like and comment to beat the algorithm god. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Welcome to part 2, the story of Horizon Zero Dawn. Let's get right back into it. The Nora have a tradition called the Proving. Every year, the young adults of the tribe who have trained for it gather for tests of combat readiness. All who finish the Proving are automatically gifted the title Brave. The Nora's version of an adventurer and hunter. The overall winner is given the right to ask anything they desire of the high matriarchs. Before the derangement and the Red Raid began, when Ross was young, he passed the rite of proving and became a Nora Brave. He eventually had a partner with whom his daughter named Alana. When Alana was 6 years old, the sacred lands were invaded by 12 murderous outlanders. They made their way to Ross's little village. They killed his partner and took his toddler daughter as hostage along with 5 other people. Whenever the Nora Braves got too close to the bees, they would kill one of the hostages. So, through the sacred lands, the villains and the Braves went until they reached the border of the sacred land. It was forbidden of any Nora to leave the sacred lands. To do so meant exile. The Outlanders, in an extreme display of cruelty, took the hostages beyond the border of the Nora land and killed them all just beyond the reach of the Braves. Nora law dictated that their bodies could not be recovered. Rost had lost everything. He couldn't even claim his daughter's body. He begged the High Matriarchs to grant him a way to leave the lands, to hunt these outlanders, to take revenge. The Matriarchs granted him the taboo and secretive title of Nebuzir. His spirit was ritualistically taken from his body and delivered to the arms of the All-Mother, their religious deity. As a seeker, Rost was able to leave the sacred lands, though he did so as an outsider, and he could never reveal what he was doing or why. He would not be welcomed back into Nora society. He would not be welcomed back into the sacred lands. For an entire year, Rost hunted and stalked the know what she had done wrong to deserve this treatment, but Ross didn't have answers for her. One day, when Aloy was no more than 8 years old, a particularly bad experience sent the girl into a meltdown, running through a forest, where she, quite by accident, tumbled into some old ruins of the Old Ones, a place that Nora were forbidden to delve into, a place that Frost had told her to stay away from. But she had to go through those ruins to find a way out. Within this metal underground, little Aloy came across an ancient piece of technology called a focus. Aloy was a 99.47% genetic match of Elizabeth Sobek. When she put the focus on the side of her head, it sprang to life and started feeding her old world information. Of course, she didn't understand any of it, but it allowed the kid to inspect old holographic displays, interact with old terminals and mechanisms, and even view messages recorded hundreds of years ago. Rost and Aloy eventually found each other. He called her back up to the surface and extracted her from the cave. But that little focus on the side of her head did not escape his attention. Rost tried to take it from her like it was a toy that she wasn't meant to have. But Aloy insisted on keeping it, physically moving away from Rost when he tried to move towards her. But rather than make demands or punish the girl for her ruin-dying adventure, Rost refocused her energy into something productive. If she was going to be sneaking around, getting into trouble, then she needed to be able to defend herself in the wilds. So she began training as a hunter for the following day. Pretty smooth parenting there, I gotta say. Ross didn't especially like the focus that Aloy had for. He called it a plaything. He was probably quite suspicious of it, being as it was old one technology. But he humored the girl and let her keep it on. Unbeknownst to Ross, the focus was feeding Aloy extra information about the world around her, giving her insights into things that even he couldn't perceive. Ross taught the girl about herbs and medicine, how to sneak to avoid dangerous machines, how to use rocks and sounds to divert attention away from her, how to harvest the broken machinery. Aloy's focus showed her weak points on the bodies of the dangerous machines, so that when the time came for her to use her bow, she knew just where to attack. Using the focus, Aloy was even able to track the pathing of a herd, sneak through and render assistance to a Nora boy who had fallen near the herd, much to Rost's disapproval. What she did was exceedingly dangerous, but the alternative was just letting the boy fall victim to the machines. The boy, named Teb, tried to give his thanks to Rost and Aloy, something that was forbidden, as the Nora were not to speak to outcasts, ever. Approaching Nora Brace, collected him and chastised him for his conduct, but left him the better at that. Rost was still a known presence to the Nora defenders, and even in anger at the situation, the elder brave just let it be. Despite little Aloy's bravery, some Nora children who were watching Ross and the girl walk home cruelly threw rocks at her and called her names. And when the children admitted, she asked Ross, why was she outcast? Who was her mother? Probably questions that she had asked a number of times before, but Ross's answers were all the same. It was not for them to know. The ones who may know were one of the high matriarchs. So how, Aloy asked, could she get them to tell her? And the answer to this was not an easy one. The path would be long and difficult for Aloy. If she completed the proving like Ross had so long ago, she would become a Nora brave, by earned right, no longer an outcast. But if she sought answers from the high matriarchs, only by winning the proving could she command them to answer. The one who wins the proving may ask one thing of the high matriarchs. If Aloy wants answers, well, she's going to have to train all through her childhood and her teenage years for that one day with proving. She has one chance to win. There would be no do-overs. That very day, that very moment, Aloy decided that this was going to be her path forward. Rost supported her decision and immediately began training the girl as a hunter and a warrior. Now, before we try to turn ahead, let's tarry for a moment. Let's return to when Gaia sacrificed herself in an attempt to stop Hades, a story that will overlap with many others and is of utmost importance. We go back to the destruction of Gaia right before Aloy's creation began. The explosion of Gaia sent tremors throughout the land, and there was a supposed former Banu shaman named Silence, and like a future little Aloy, he had a focus of his own. He found it while delving into a ruin, and he had spent weeks preparing and learning about it. And when the destruction of Gaia took place, Silence Embrace, the heart of Nora territory, a place outcasts were not allowed. But Ross walked in honor as a brave before existing as an outcast. The gates were open for him and for Aloy. He had one final test for Aloy before the proving. A vicious beast called a Sawtooth was in the Embrace. It was a threat to the locals and the receivers of the proving. Ross wants Aloy to destroy it with no assistance. The lesson in this exercise is that though they are outcasts and treated poorly by the North, the Sawtooth Beast was a threat to life. Aloy successfully takes down the shield, but not for herself, but to protect those who perhaps could not protect themselves. To keep safe the brave who would have to fend it off, or the other young participants that would be in the proving. She will need to fight for others, to serve a purpose greater than herself. At the threshold to Mother's Heart, where a feast will take place before the proving, Ross must take his leave of Aloy. She will have to walk the crazy, crowded village alone, navigate the ceremony herself, with perhaps the guidance of the matriarch herself, but otherwise alone. And Aloy is obviously nervous and uncertain. It's a Cloudra is exclusively homeschooled daughter off at college. Ross has to nudge her along with reassurances that with time it will feel normal and the other Nora will warm up to her eventually. And to ensure that Aloy does not use him as a crutch, and to prevent her from breaking Nora law by seeking him out, Ross bids Aloy goodbye. He is going to venture where she cannot find him. Her future is more important than what they have, and though Aloy tries to argue against this, Ross is determined. He knows she will try to track him, but he will make sure that it's not possible for her. It's time for them to say farewell. They must walk different paths. She fights him until their last words. Aloy promises she will not let Ross go. Just getting through the gates proves to be a little bit dramatic. It's only the arrival of High Matriarch Tirza that saves Aloy's hide. The Braves guarding the gate to Mother's Heart actually tried to deny her entrance to the proving ceremony. Bad form, boys. Aloy has every right to participate, even as an outcast according to their own law. High Matriarch Tirza has actually been anxiously awaiting Aloy's chance in the proving. She herself is quite intrigued by Aloy's origins, if her birth was a gift from the All-Mother that they worship, though we know that by All-Mother what they're actually referring to is Gaia. Aloy gets to meet a number of folk at the feast, some of them quite friendly and excited to speak with her. A few she's already met through happenstance out in the wilds. There are stories to be watched, speeches to be heard, history to be learned about. Different tribes are here from Moscow to Karja to participate in the feast and honor the proving that will take place the next day. And Aloy catches a signal on her focus coming from the man from Karja. This is the man, Olin, the prisoner of the cult called the Eclipse. Aloy approaches Olin to speak with him, and this is when Hades becomes aware of Aloy's existence, and when Silence becomes aware of Aloy. This is a huge moment in her life, and she doesn't even realize it. And Hades sees her through Olin. home.
Oh my goodness.
It is
Oh
the
my hand.
Master
Oh
Helis
my
himself that
goodness.
intends
They're
to
going
handle
ham.
Aloy. Rather than break the girl's neck immediately, however, he hesitates and wanders with the choking girl to the cliffside, wondering to himself the same thing that Silence has. Why this girl? What's so important? His internal questioning costs him the kill. Helis does deliver a cut to her throat, but Rost watched the proving from afar, and when the bloodshed began, he leapt into action, arriving at the proving grounds just before Helis could chuck Aloy off the mountainside. Rost cannot stop Helis. He cannot cut him down. Helis proves the victor in this fight as well, but lackluster in finishing his work. Helis orders the mountaintop destroyed to conceal evidence, and with his final act, Rost bids Aloy to survive what is to come, and gently rolls her away from the blast that will claim everything and everyone still on the proving grounds. When Aloy awakens, she's within the All-Mother Mountain, where only the High Matriarchs typically dwell. She remembers High Matriarch Thyrsa, arguing that she deserved to be near her mother right now, meaning their deity, the All-Mother. Some time has passed since the massacre, and Aloy's focus now shows her data from that day. She can see Helis enforcing Hades' kill order, target imaging on her location, Olin's data transmission of their conversation, and an old random data transmission of Elizabeth Sobek, obtained by Hades showing Aloy to be a 99.47% copy of Elizabeth. It doesn't mean anything to Aloy, not yet, but the data collected by her focus will soon be her guide forward. High Matriarch Thyrsa takes Aloy into the heart of the mountain, where she was found as a baby. Thyrsa believed Aloy came from the womb of the mountain, and again she's...
Hey, are we gonna fit? Go. At American Family Insurance, we're here to carefully protect your dreams. All right, open your eyes. Welcome home.
Deactivate or take control of the swarm. But then there was the truth. Humanity needed to fight, yes, to slow the swarm as much as possible. Not to buy time for salvation, though. There would be no salvation. All would be consumed. No one was going to survive this. It would take 50 years to crack the Pharaoh Plague. At best, the world had 16 months. And if the swarm didn't kill every living creature on Earth, then oxygen deprivation would. In fact, environmental breakdown was an equal threat to the violence of the swarm. There was no escaping the finality of mankind. Time would be paid for in blood, and it was an unfair choice that no one had the right to make, but it had to be made. Operation Enduring Victory would buy time for the greatest minds in the world to enact Project Zero Dawn. At the heart of Zero Dawn was the most sophisticated artificial intelligence ever conceived, mothered by Elizabeth Sobek. It was called Gaia. Gaia would act as the governing center over several subordinate functions. More on them in a bit, but Gaia's goal was eventually restoring life to Earth. Now, this wouldn't be possible with the swarm active, but Gaia would carry on beyond life on Earth. She was tasked with making the trillions of decisions that would be required to create the deactivation codes to stop the swarm, build the infrastructure to transmit those codes, then terraform the Earth and restore the potential for life to exist there once again, down to the tiniest of bacteria. Gaia would need to function independently for centuries, detoxifying the Earth's atmosphere, cleaning the poisoned seas, regreening the Earth through seed stalks, and then bringing wildlife back from extinction. Eventually, via cradle facilities, when the world was readied, human life would begin anew, with mother and father systems to raise a new generation and ready them for this strange new world. The subordinate systems needed to accomplish this were as Gaia's limbs. Minerva would crack the Pharaoh Plague to stop the swarm. Hephaestus would create the machinery necessary for other subordinate... If you enjoy this content, please like and comment to feed the algorithm god. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. About 250 million years ago, something called the Permian-Triassic mass extinction took place, also called the Great Dying. It was a series of massive volcanic eruptions that took place in what we would know today as Siberia.
And over the course of thousands of years, it's estimated that over 90% of ocean life and 70% of land life was completely wiped out. A drawn-out extinction event caused by the acidification of oceans and depletion of oxygen. But remember, it spanned thousands of years. We won't talk too much about the Great Dying, but Earth life rebounded and adapted over the course of millions of years. This spans a massive amount of time, given the context of what blips our lifespans are. Now, let's visit the not-so-far-off future. Hold on to your comfort rolls of toilet paper and security bags of gasoline. We're about to watch the world burn. Throughout the decade of 2020 and into 2030, robotics industries became established and took strides in becoming bedrocks of modern society. Automation, it's good, right? Well, this may be hard to believe, but we proved to be terrible stewards of our world. Through climate change, calamities began, but what sort of calamities? Well, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened during this decade or so, but in the early 2030s, something called the Great Die-Off began. Land masses were lost or became uninhabitable. Climate refugees began migrating to foreign lands, straining relations between governing bodies. In 2033, the Azores Islands in the northern Atlantic were completely swallowed up by the sea. In 2036, New Zealand began to sink, its coastlines completely lost, causing most of its population to panic and flee. Over 1 billion people died, and the world was completely upended, not over the course of generations or millennia, but within a few years. As the most vulnerable were left to fight and suffer, and as governments heaved under the burden of population shifts and social chaos, the private sector stepped in and slowly began seizing
residue. Looks like the machine's claw got stuck here. Slowed it down while the hunter kept running. Close to his tracks end here, and no sign of the last hunter either. Whenever these machines are watching that crack in the cliff, better clear them out first. Where did you come from? I'm not sure where you. machines are interested in that crevice in the cliff. I should check it out. Got a feeling Lao was pretty resourceful.
They're gone? I wasn't expecting a rescue. Thank you.
I'm after the claw strider. Where did it go?
You're hunting it?
It's okay. I felt better.
Who are you?
Just stay here while I try to pick up its trail. I'll let you know where it's at. I can handle it from here.
Slow it down.
Stay back. Don't fire until I do.
Watch for its claws.
This is hunter killers.
I've got your back! We did it!
It's Lao, right? Ben thinks he left you for dead.
He made it back. I was worried about him.
He said you saved him by getting the claw strider to chase you.
And he saved me by sending you after me, so we're even. I can't wait to see the look on his face when he figures out I'm alive.
Go on back then. And thanks for the assist. Slowing that machine down helped.
Then here, take this. I can craft another one if I need it, but... well, I hope I won't after this, not for a while.
One more hunter gets to go home. Now I just have to return the seed pouches to Shale.